Hello, hello. I'm Bonnie. This is Tech Stack Nation. Happy Friday. We're back again with the Angular team. We love learning Angular from the Angular team. It's so much fun. So really quickly, I want to thank our sponsors, AG Grid, for helping us make this awesome place to have discussions like this. And next, I want to thank our guest, Andrew Scott from the Angular team. How are you doing, Andrew? Thank you so much for making time for us.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks.
So I actually, this is the first time that we've met you. You've been around, but I tried to stalk you online. I didn't find that much on social media, but you've kind of been with the Angular team. Have you been on the Angular team for years and years, or you've just been working with Angular for years? Because I saw like some really old stuff that you did like years ago.
Yeah, I joined the Angular team in 2019. And at the time that was still trying to land Ivy. So that one took years and years. So I was working really, really hard to get it landed internally, fixing like any bugs that came up, learning a lot of Angular at the time. But yeah, 2019 was when I joined.
Ivy was an epic effort. And I think maybe that has something in common with Zoneless, because Ivy, I think, was something that maybe the people using Angular out, the civilians don't maybe see the beauty of it, but it really opened so many doors. And I think Zoneless also, like, I'm the one who asked you to come and talk to us about Zoneless because I think that people really need to know more about Zoneless. But I don't see a lot of hype like Signals. Like everybody loves Signals, right? But they're not really hyped. But I'm hyped. Okay, so I just want to really quickly kind of set the tone for why I asked you to come and talk about Zoneless, and then I'm just going to kick it over to you and you can help us wrap our heads around this, right? Because I'm going to go back, what I think it was 2017 Angular Connect backstage. I asked Stephen Fluen, when are we going to have Zoneless, right? Because I heard about Zoneless and I said, when is it going to be ready? And he said, well, that's the thing. It's not so much of when it's ready, like it could be ready anytime, but if we're going to use Zoneless, we need the people to start using markForCheck, right? That's kind of the tricky thing is it's not so much. So we need people to start writing their code in a way that they can use Zoneless. And as soon as people do that, then we can take the benefit of Zoneless. So basically, even now, once we start embracing markForCheck and using it in our code, then we're going to be ready for Zoneless. And the Angular team, I think after the backlash of JS, right? The Angular team doesn't like to force people to refactor their code. They don't want to force things. They want to really make it flexible for us. So the Angular team doesn't want to push this on us, but I do, at least for my architects, right? I want my architects, because we have some enterprise architects in here that are running teams. And so I'm telling them now, like, I want you to start teaching your teams why they should use Zoneless. And so I asked you, Andrew, to come and help me explain to them what benefits they're going to get and why Zoneless is going to help them. Why should they do markForCheck? And then even when they do start implementing markForCheck, what are the best practices and guidelines for doing that in an orderly fashion?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I can start by addressing the question directly or kind of move a little bit backwards and go over some of the benefits of Zoneless. I don't know. What do you think?
I love that. Yeah. Let's start with even why we should care about Zoneless. Like what is it? Why should we?
Okay, may I present? Can I just hit the present
Absolutely.
button? Present. Can I just hit the present button? All right, cool. Here we go. Zoneless Angular. Make this bigger. All right, so this is sort of the Zoneless documentation that will be up on angular.dev, the new and beautiful doc site. And there's right at the top a good section about why Zoneless. So one of the things about zones is that it doesn't really know anything about what your application state is. And so it just change-detects your application whenever something interesting happens, whenever you could have changed something. So that is like browser events, promises, timeouts. fetches, all of these things cause Zone.js to go, all right, let me check your views. You might not have done anything, but it's going to check it just in case. So when you're not doing that, it's a little bit faster. Do we have, yeah, so on top of that, like in order to know about these interesting things happening, Zone.js has to patch all these browser events and browser APIs. So that comes with bundle size increase to the tune of like a couple dozen kilobytes in your production bundle, which is not small. And it has to be in the main, the core JS. Like it has to patch those APIs before anything else happens. So it's like very critical to Angular working correctly today. Yeah, that was the core web vitals part. So that'll be payload size and startup time and cost will be better without zones. I don't know if you've ever had to debug some stuff happening, but your stack traces are just crazy when Zone.js is in the mix. Am I frozen? Should I go back? Couldn't tell if I was frozen or not. Okay. All right, cool. And then some of the edge case things where like Zone.js, it does have to patch these APIs. It doesn't always do it correctly, especially with new ones. And so we're like constantly trying to keep up with the ecosystem, with new browser APIs, with like not breaking things. We're not even adding new browser patches because that just makes it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's just long-term, Zone.js is a huge maintenance burden and will continue to grow as the browser APIs grow.
How awesome would it be for the Angular team if you could actually just let go of Zoneless and not maintain it? How cool would that be?
Yeah,
and that's not there yet,
debugging.
But it will be?
Right. Well, yeah, it's not on angular.dev because we didn't have a place to put it in the menu. But the documentation is in the repo.
Awesome. Love it. We get the exclusive debut, y'all. Okay, so does anyone have questions or comments about the benefits? Can you put that screen back up, Andrew? Because I want to see if anyone has questions about this. Do you guys feel like this is going to give you a benefit? So it sounds like it's not only benefiting the developers, like it's actually going to benefit the Angular team if we could get everybody to move forward with this. Because basically, okay, so, and this will be the next question, right? What is the easiest way to do this in a dry fashion so that we're not putting markForCheck here and here and here and here and here and everywhere? Okay, does anybody in the group have questions about this, what we're seeing so far? Basic, I want to explain it like this. One second, Akila. There was a restaurant in Texas. There's another one in Colorado that has really bad Mexican food, but it's it's a great place to take kids. And they have a little flag that you raise to let the waiter know that you need something, right? And so I feel like it's like that. And otherwise, you have to just always have the waitress and waiters always constantly looking at the tables, and that's more work. Might be a bad analogy, but basically Zone.js just takes up a lot more, there's just so much more going on that's not necessary. Okay, so Akila, what's your question?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Why are you sorry? What did you do?
Because it took me a minute to get off mute, but I guess you couldn't really see the mic.
Yeah. Don't worry.
Just so I'm really clear, like, of what change detection does, right? So the purpose of change detection is to make sure that the state reflects what the model is doing, right? So why would you, what is changing in the way that we develop things where that doesn't matter, where maybe you need someone to say, hey, something was done. I don't know if you know something was done, but before you do something else, now do this. Like, what are we doing now that make those checks and balances? Because Zone was there for a reason, right?
This is why I was talking about the okay, because you're in Texas now, right? You
Yes.
know, if you go into a restaurant in Texas, that those waitresses are instructed that you are never to let the iced tea run out, right? Like that's standard in Texas. You're going to get your iced tea, and before it gets to the bottom, they're going to refill it, whether you ask them to or not, because that's how they were taught. Never let the iced tea run out, or water, whatever you're drinking, soda. They're always going to refill it before it hits the bottom. Maybe not everywhere, but you know what I mean, right? Especially in Texas. So, and then you go to the exam, and that's Zone.js. Zone.js is always watching everything all the time, right? And then you go to the example of the raise your flag at the Mexican restaurant, where when you want the waiter to come over, you raise the flag. And then all they have to do is watch for the flags. And when you raise the flag and let them know to come over, and that's more efficient than the iced tea example. So that's like, to me, that's kind of how I look at it. Like, rather than saying Zone.js needs to watch everything all the time, everywhere, which can get crazy, then they're saying if you just like basically put a marker every time, and it's not going to call change detection, but it's going to be there when change detection comes around the next time. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? Andrew, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do, because this is like the first question you asked basically is the mark-for-check thing, and this ties into Akila's question as well. So pretty much the same. So when you asked Steven back in 2017 about Zoneless, and he said, well, everyone has to call mark-for-check. That was true in 2017. This is not true today so much.
Are you going to do it for us?
Yeah, I mean, we are doing it for you, right? So yeah, we did not want to do Zoneless because, like you said, it was just not a good developer experience. Because requiring people to call mark-for-check and remember to do that every time they update state is a terrible, terrible developer experience. And even the components repo, which has tried to follow on push and call mark-for-check, doesn't do it right all the time. So when we were trying to enable Zoneless, we found some cases in the components repo where this was not done. And how do you know? So yeah, the short story is signals kind of solve this problem. When you update a signal, it basically, I mean, not exactly, but pretty much calls mark-for-check.
So if you're using signals, you don't even need to worry about mark-for-check. You can just go Zoneless, like,
correct.
Easy?
Yeah, yeah.
See,
there are
like,
some
this
details.
is brand new information for me right now. I did not even know this. I was still telling people you need to get used to the idea of using mark-for-check and stop fighting it, but you don't even have to do that with signals. This is so exciting.
The same goes for async pipe. Async pipe calls mark-for-check anytime a new thing emits. So if you're using on push, that is the only way that works is if you're calling mark-for-check, updating a signal using async pipe. So on push is kind of step one.
Nice. Akila has another question.
Yeah.
Akila.
So you said when you're using signals, you're a little bit more aware that you expect something because you're reacting to something. But did zone, but by having zone, how am I want to act this? I know you have to become a better developer and be more aware of when you're using state, but using zones or sometimes having those error messages does help you when sometimes you're not aware when state does change in a way, right? So even if you're not using signals, what is the best practices for you to be more aware of the state? I guess that's the best way for beginners, in that way. Or even if you're even thinking about, I guess when you're a beginner and you see certain error messages, that's when you actually notice Zone.js the most, because honestly, sometimes in a lot of people applications, you don't even you don't even know what zone. Richard's reason why it's not popular, right? So how can you be more aware of those type of errors? I guess, if that makes sense.
I think
Yeah.
that's a. Go ahead. Go ahead.
It's a bit tough. So what zones enable is for you to zones enable really good developer experience in kind of the simple path, right? Once you encounter an issue that's caused by a Zone.js problem, it's like the worst. Trying to debug something that happened because you were outside the zone, or I don't know, something else happened with zones. It's just terrible. But the beginner state is really, really good. And we played with the idea of like, okay, that developer experience is great. What if we just improve Zone.js in some way, right? Because what it allows you to do is just use plain objects, not tell Angular when you've updated stuff, and it'll mostly just work most of the time. Unless you use a new unpatched API and then it doesn't work. And then like as a beginner, what are you gonna do? Like what? It's like terrible because there's like no information of why change detection did not happen when you fall
Change
out of
detection
the zone.
is kind of an advanced topic in itself. For like, I was running with Angular for like I was writing Angular for years before I even started to care about how like I didn't even, I was just breaking all the things. But it does take a bit to really understand change detection. And I think you kind of have to get to that level where you're ready to understand it. It's pretty complicated. But we don't necessarily need to understand. And this is the thing, I think, more and more, we don't necessarily need to understand all of how everything works under the hood, right? Because we can fry our brains sometimes. As civilians out writing Angular, we just need to understand, I think really, and this is why I love having you here, because it really helps us to understand sometimes why the Angular team makes the decisions that they do, and why, like how Zoneless, and actually having you come in and explain it, because you explain it better than I do, is so great. I'm so excited that we're going to be able to use Zoneless without having to worry about mark_for_check, because so many of, like I said, everybody thinks signals is sexy, right? So people are already really embracing signals. Then that's just going to make Zoneless like so easy. That's so exciting. I love that, because that was the second question I was going to ask you, was like, how are we going to put mark_for_check in our code in the best way? And we don't even have to. Edward's got a question. Hello, Edward.
So should we be using signals for all of our template variables?
Oh, good question. Good question.
Yes. So there's still some work to be done with signals, right? Like the Forms APIs, router APIs. We don't have stores for signals to make complex objects better. It's like a little bit difficult to work with. So we still have a lot of work to do there. If you can, do use signals in template for template variables. But yeah, there are some rough edges still, and we recognize that for sure.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a greenfield application, so I'm free to do whatever I want, and just really wanted to know what the new best practice is.
Yeah, signals. Async pipe is fine. Observables through async pipe, that works just as well. That'll call mark_for_check under the hood. But certainly you want to opt into on-push change detection strategy.
So when do I have to use mark_for_check then?
When you update state without using a signal or without going through an async pipe. So like, you have a primitive variable on your class, right? And you just update it. You have to call mark_for_check there.
Great questions. Pavel.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question for the Zoneless, because I've seen that there are the changes about the local template variables. For this kind of thing, is it the mark_for_check also built it in, or we need to do the mark_for_check on,
That's new, I think 18.1. I think we saw Matthew talking about that today.
Yeah, and you can do the also template variable as well. So that's why I'm asking, because you can do ng template with let if definition, where you have the local template variable. So for this one, I'm just asking for out of curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, same thing. If you change the value of one of those local variables, you have to notify Angular in some way, right? There are ways that we could have done this to not be like that, right? Like there are frameworks that patch things. The compiler patches your template reads and like makes them signals under the hood, or you know, creates proxies around them, and then you kind of can. It looks like you're using plain objects. But really they're proxies around things that are like markForCheck when you have the assignment.
Right.
Pavel,
Yeah,
real
but
quick.
the at let, the local or whatever it will be at const at whatever at var, you know, that in itself does not do anything related to marking your component for check.
All right.
Pavel, really quickly, can you put up your screen and show us that little code snippet that Matt posted?
Oh yeah, I can.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
So that we can look, because I saw it, but I don't think the other people in the group saw it. I know Andrew's probably seen it, but
Yeah.
all of us have not seen that yet, because that's going to be coming, I think, in 18.1. And Andrew, if you want, you can, if you have any comments about this as well. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Pavel.
Oh no, it's okay. It's completely okay. I would, when we have this opportunity, I really like that, you know, to ask in the forward. So I'm just trying to figure it out. Oh, there is it. All
We
right.
appreciate you making time for us, Andrew.
Yeah, no worries.
So this is the new templates here. What was Matthew was showing to us. Should be able to see it. Maybe I will zoom it out a little bit.
Yeah, it needs to be bigger.
Yeah. All right.
Okay,
one.
so this is the atlet. Then, okay, so Andrew, he said we're looking at this in V18.1. So this is not actually going to be there yet, but this is something that's being discussed, or it's coming. Do you know?
Yeah, it's like public information because you can snoop people's public GitHub commits like to their, you know, forks. But yeah, Christian is working on this. You know, no promises on when things land. But yeah, this is an active development.
And
oh yeah, but sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out, like Andrew was saying, that in async it's already built in the markForCheck. So probably the thing is gonna be that let user is going to have the dirty flag on with markForCheck, and then the Angular knows that he needs to refresh this as well. Is it correct?
Yeah, that's right. And the markForCheck only matters if your component is on push, right? If you're using the default change detection strategy, then like it's going to get checked anyways.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. And this is so for being able to say that correctly. So for the components which are on push, then we need to do the manual thing on the markForCheck.
If you're not using signals or the async pipe.
Yeah.
If you're using this atlet and you're updating something
then
without
it's already,
the async pipe, then yes, markForCheck.
Yeah,
but
right.
only if you're using on push.
Yeah, great to know. Thanks.
We're doing such a good job, everybody. Okay, does anyone else have questions about Zoneless? Andrew, did you want to add anything? Is there anything we missed about Zoneless or about the new template syntax? Anything else?
Questions? Yeah, I think one of the things you said earlier was about Ivy and how it was kind of one of those under the radar things that people don't think about, but it was like so huge. Internally, it's like the improvements that were made over the Vue engine compiler. There was like many dozens of developer years saved on build times internally because it's just like that much better than the previous compiler. So yeah, I think Zoneless is similar, where it's one of those things that it just is going to go under the radar. And one of the interesting things that came out of this project, and I'll show this one.
While you're bringing that up, this reminds me of when Dylan and Miles came to see us and they were talking about the template compiler. And that was another thing that, like, we're doing all this work that you'll hopefully never notice. I feel like it's like that again.
Yeah. Yeah, so like I said, when you fall out of the zone, it's really hard to understand what happened, right? Like, developer experience is great for beginners because you could just use plain objects until something weird happens, right? So it's not really uncommon for this to happen either, right? I've compiled like a list of things where developers were confused because they did something and it did not get reflected in the DOM, right? Hey, I updated my observable. It didn't work. Like, change detection didn't run when I'm using a resize observable. Setting a signal, it has to be done inside the zone. And it goes on and on and on, right? There's all these router things where it would warn you when you navigate outside the zone because the new view isn't going to be shown if you do that. You know, it's mutation observer is not patched by default. And yeah, there's like 40
So these are like
issues
all the bugs that you could close.
Yeah.
Or issues.
So,
I don't know if they're bugs or issues, but like
this
it's
is
just
closed.
confusion.
Right.
Love
this is
that.
closed. And yeah, I'll go into a little bit more how and why. But yeah, well, Paul?
I'm just wondering if we are correct because right now we we are going to use signals on the templates as much as possible with input signals as well with computation and other stuff like that. In some way, it's telling me that basically if I would have components set up on change of detection on push or not, it won't matter anymore because basically Angular is going to solve this for me with this zoneless thing. Is it correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right.
It's better than we thought, Andrew.
Yeah, so this is like the even more under the radar than enabling complete zoneless is that the zoneless scheduler is kind of now base Angular. It's always enabled, even if you're using zones, because that's just how the framework should work. And we're thinking about zoneless as sort of how it should work. And zones are a feature on top of that, right? It allows you to use just plain objects for state. It allows you to use the default change detection strategy, which is a terrible name for a change detection strategy. But especially because we don't want it to be the default anymore. Yeah, like zones is a feature that gives you certain things like, you know, plain objects. It gives you stability on the server because it knows about promises and stuff that are happening. But at its core, Angular can work without that, right? If you tell us when you make changes, we don't need to know that promises are happening. Like, you might just be logging stuff to your, you know, error server or, you know, logging visual interactions and things like that. And that doesn't require us to run change detection, but we still do with zones. Yeah, and I have another example. Let's see if I can pull this up. Sort of a small
You were
demo.
showing us the closed tickets. Were you done with that? Because I know Pavel jumped in with a question.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, it's so I have a demo about this, and you know, live demo is fun.
We love live demos.
Yeah.
You're like Santa Claus today, Andrew. You should visit us more often. This is fun.
Okay, so this is a demo on view transitions, right? So it's a really simple application. We have one component. When you click the button, it's going to increment the counter. And counter is a signal. And then just some styles, right? Of course, infinite screen. You'll notice the first time I clicked it, it kind of animated and didn't update. And now it's kind of one behind. But the view transition is sort of the animation, right? It's navigating, well, not navigating. There is a router feature where you can enable view transitions through navigations. But let me just refresh that again and show the code one more time, right? So on button click, we increment the counter, right? So the way view transitions work is you say document start view transition, and then you update the DOM, and you can return a promise to tell it like the DOM update is done, animate between the previous state and the new state. And when I click increment, it animates, but the state is not updated. And you think, okay, well, maybe it's because I didn't call markForCheck, right? So let's try that. Refresh the page, try again. Didn't work. Let's try
This
something
is how
else.
we learn Angular. Yes, we try this and try that and just
Yeah,
randomly
exactly,
bang on
right.
it until something works.
This is
That's how I learned change detection.
right. So now it's like, okay, I know that, you know, I can run a timeout, and like it should have worked by then, right? Change detection to happen after, you know, we have all these set timeouts. Yeah. We have these set timeouts everywhere to avoid expression change. Okay, let's try that.
Yeah.
That didn't work either. Okay, well, what about a promise? That didn't work. Okay, well, there's this new feature called after next render. So let's create a new promise and resolve after the rendering happens. Let's try that. Did it save? Yeah.
I love this demo. I love the nope
This is
comment.
even worse because the page is frozen. And there's no animation when I do this. So does anyone have a guess at what's happening here?
I think after next render needs to just, yeah, it must be broken. That's what we would say.
That's what you might think, right?
It must be your code that's broken. It's obviously not our code that's broken.
Screw Angular. I'm going to use React.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you gotta use set state. So React has some similar stuff, right? You have to tell React when you updated state. Yeah, I know you were joking, but like, you know, there are other similar patterns in other frameworks where you have, it doesn't, other frameworks don't have Zone.js, so you have to tell it when to update.
I love this demo because this is really the situation that we get into as civilians out on the street trying to figure out Angular, that we are trying this and trying that, and we just try something until we get the behavior that we want. And that's how we can use Angular for years without actually really understanding how it works. That's why we love when the Angular team comes to explain it to us.
Yeah, and this is the example of the really terrible developer experience when you fall out of the zone, right? Everything's fine and dandy when you're using patched APIs. But you remember what I said earlier, like we don't do new patches for all these new browser APIs. So start view transition is not patched by zone. This is happening outside the Angular zone. Change detection does not run when these async things happen. So change detection is just not running. That's it. And this is like you fell out of the zone. Terrible developer experience. Absolutely terrible. You have no idea that this happened. So in version 18, I scroll down, I disabled the new feature, but it's on by default now. Right? So ignore changes outside zone is true prior to V18. That's just how Angular worked. If you were outside the zone, good luck to you. Like you have to call tick or like zone.run, those kinds of things. So this actually does work. If I go, well, I didn't inject, but if I had this.zone.run, right? You have to remember to do that, which is not a good thing to have to teach new developers, right? So I'm going to go down here. And, well, I don't even need that now, right? We're just going to bootstrap the application, right? Because we just default Angular. No other changes. V18, it works wonderfully.
Nice.
And yeah, this is like related to that issue I showed, right? Which is like you update a signal, you expect Angular to know about this and update the DOM, but it doesn't all the time. If you ended up outside the zone, too bad, right? And that's a really unfortunate place to be.
So do you need that after next render?
That prevents the zero.
So yeah, I can remove this. I think you do here because I kind of
show the 0
cheated.
twice.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't. So it works without it.
It does, but I can't say exactly why. It just happens to be, well, so it wouldn't if I
thought it was
did.
because the signal updated.
Well, so you don't know when Angular is going to flush that to the DOM, right? This is not synchronous, right? Like every time you update a signal, we don't synchronously go and update that. We kind of schedule change detection. So after next render would be after that happens. The reason it worked is kind of like, you know, I can put a bunch of promise resolves here and then it probably won't work. Still does. I am using Zone still. So that's another thing is that Zone.js does not coalesce events. So if I use providers, provide zone change detection, event coalescing true, this is probably going to break it.
This is fun. We're all figuring out Angular together.
Oh, it still works. That's nice.
Akila has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I asked that first question, and hopefully this doesn't derail the topic, because you mentioned doing async things is one of the reasons why you fall out of that context, out the zone. So I guess it's safe to say that if actually, it's just a comment. I didn't have a question, but I just wanted to say I think that's one of the reasons why I said that, because I don't think anyone noticed what that context is, what zone is, until you get those error messages. I think the first time I ever known anything about zone is when, or change detection is just when I got a whole bunch of like, yeah, you're doing something wrong. So that's why you know it's you.
You know what, Akila, I think would be really helpful for you if you haven't already watched it is it was just a few weeks ago. We had Alex Rickabaugh and Ben Lesh. Were you here for that?
No.
If not, you should watch that video. It was so cool. And Ben was actually really talking about how damn confusing asynchronous programming is, because synchronous programming goes top to bottom, left to right, and asynchronous programming goes blah, 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 all over the place, right? And it's just crazy stuff. So if you understand asynchronous and synchronous, and also Samantha and Sandra and I did a talk called Don't Block Your Stack. So if you watch Don't Block Your Stack first, and then watch the signals proposal talk with Ben Lesh, because he's actually talking about, he's actually going into a little bit more detail about, you know, observables versus signals and the difference between the two. And I think that would really be super helpful for you, because they kind of like, you want to understand asynchronous and synchronous before you even start getting into change detection. And then you want to understand change detection before you get to zones. And so you're basically trying to skip ahead like 2 levels. And you're like diving into the deep end of the pool. So start with Don't Block Your Stack.
Need to know that. You know?
Yeah, they're good questions. We love you.
I think I'm the resident junior, you know, with the big balls. But yeah, that's the reason why I asked that. That was good, Bonnie. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really was using Angular like out in the wild and writing stuff going into production for years before I understood change detection. So it really is a great discussion. It's a great question. And the reason why it's so confusing is asynchronous programming. But that I really loved it when Ben was like top to bottom, left to right, and then asynchronous just goes everywhere. And he explains that in a little more detail in the and I just put that up like last week. The whole entire thing is on YouTube. It's awesome. And he explains a little bit better.
I have a confession to make along those lines. I have no idea what change detection strategy is. You know, I'm on 17.
That's okay. That's okay. This is a safe space, Ed. It's allowed. It's okay. But it really is really great to understand change detection and again, like it was only a few years ago that I understood that I was confused about. I didn't even know that I was confused about JavaScript being asynchronous, like JavaScript, but then there's the event loop. And I was like, I was totally missing that part. And here's the reason, and this is why you guys, really the talk that Sandra and I did with Samantha about don't block your stack was exactly that. Like there's the event loop, and the reason why we did that talk is because, like me, there are a whole lot of developers out there right now, including some of you, that don't even realize they're confused, and they're writing bugs into their code because of that confusion. And it's not even about Zoneless or Angular, like that's not even it. It's about the event loop and how it's like asynchronous, but it's not, right? Or it's, yeah. Anyway, so watch Don't Block Your Stack if you want to know really clearly about the event loop. And then the signals discussion that we had recently was really cool. Great questions, you guys. I love this discussion. This is how we learn. Any more questions?
Yeah, I do want to
Go ahead,
mention,
Andrew.
yeah, one of the things that Akila mentioned was that the errors are helpful. And it's funny because people really don't like the expression changed after checked error. But that's
it hurts so much. You know why? Because it's so hard to figure out if you don't understand change detection, and you just Google it. Yeah. And then I banged on it and fixed it, and then I kept going along, and then 6 months later I saw the same error again, and it was like, oh no, I remember it took me a week to fix that. But understanding change detection and lifecycle hooks really, then you never see that error again, because you need to understand why that error happens. Yes. You hit a nerve, Andrew. That expression changed after check. Like people are really traumatized by that. Yeah. But go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
Well, it's one of those errors that does tell you when something bad has happened. And for Zoneless, there's this really helpful, also experimental change that will throw that more often. But it's actually great. So yeah, you can enable, let me demo again. Let's see. And this is in the Zoneless guide too.
And while you're putting that up, Pavel, did you want to add something? I thought I heard you come off mute a second ago.
Yeah, it was just a comment to that change expression. You know, the most Stack Overflow answer for it was just use set timeout.
Use set timeout. Yeah, the new, so yeah, the reason it happens is kind of sad, and that kind of was the answer. The new answer is use signals. Then you don't have a problem.
All right, I will write it down.
Yeah, yeah, you got to go back and update that answer. So let's get rid of some of these things, right? So you're thinking, all right, let's try Zoneless, and this does work because I'm using a signal here, right? But let's go back to simple. I'm just going to do this.count++, comment that out. It's no longer a function. Just have that, and I'm still trying out Zoneless in my app, right? Here we go, refresh page. Increment, and it didn't work. Oh, my page is frozen. Oh, I think, yeah, I was having this issue the other day too. All right, well, I'll just go and talk about it instead of showing it, because I was not prepared to show this one. There is a exhaustive check no changes. So currently, check no changes does not work on anything that uses on push, because it happens after change detection happened and the dirty flag gets cleared. If you update something after that, like check no changes is not going to run on that component because it's no longer dirty. This debug feature checks everything. So if you're using Zoneless, it's kind of very useful because change detection might not have run at all if you're updating state and didn't tell Angular about it. So what this does is at a 1 second interval, it checks all the views. and sees if anything changed, and changed in a way that was not updated in the DOM. This has been really, really useful for us for seeing if applications internally, demo apps, are zoneless compatible. So yeah, this is one of those things that can help you find where you're updating state in ways that did not notify Angular.
Say it again. We want to do this. Like this is something that we need to put in our code, or this is something that's going to come out in 18.
This is you would have to opt into it. It's a debug only feature, and it checks all the views either at an interval or when the zone becomes stable, and sees if anything changed. So
can you drop that in the chat for us, please?
Yeah.
There's not a link to the docs yet. There's not. Sometimes you guys share things with us that are not in the docs yet, because it takes time to update the docs.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's on that zoneless page, which is not discoverable yet. It's in the repository, but not on angular.dev yet.
That's okay. We're the exclusive sneak preview group. We love it.
Okay. Well, I have more demos. So this one, yeah, we're the outside of zone stuff applies to tests as well. I have this really simple component. Create the component. Oh, let me do ng test. Create the component, turn on auto detect changes, which most people don't do, but it's a feature that says, hey, Angular, when you know changes happened, do it. So I don't have to call fixture.detect changes anywhere in my test manually, right? This is what people do most of the time. So I enable auto detect. I check that the DOM contains the initial value, and then I set the input, await stability, and it's not the new state. And does anyone have a guess at why this happened? It's the same thing as we've encountered before. The test bodies execute outside the zone. So I have another test there, but expected initial to be new. So what you would have to do if you wanted to use this would be zone.run, when stable, expect new, which is terrible. Absolutely terrible experience. So I'm going to enable that again, because we can go back and make it work in V18. So now I have another one where I have a simple app. I have a router outlet. I have an A component, a B component. I provide two routes, route A and B. Do the same thing, create the component, say auto detect. And then in my test, I say I'm navigating to A, and then I want the DOM to be A component when it's stable. This fails too. And again, it's because the test body executes outside the zone. It doesn't work. So what you would have to do prior to V18 to make this work is navigate inside the zone. That's where all those warnings were. Hey, you navigated outside the zone. Something bad might happen. So you have to run it inside the zone in order for it to work. So now I only have that first failure, initially equal new. So yeah, only one failed out of two. I'm going to comment this back out, go to the two states that were not working. So now both failures, and then go all the way back up and just enable regular behavior in V18, and both tests pass. So no more needing to know about zone when you're doing things that notify Angular about the changes. So this was an input, setting an input. Angular knows that happened, so it knows change detection has to happen. It schedules it. You can await stability, and it'll be there. Same with navigations, because they attach new views. Same thing. You can just navigate. Doesn't matter if you're outside the zone anymore. It just works.
Nice. Now, do we need to enable this?
No, this is default behavior now. Oh, well, auto detect. Yeah, you do have to enable auto detect. I mean, like, you don't have to, right? You can, I could have, done this fixture.detect changes instead. And then,
But
well,
I mean,
then I would have
auto detect
had
changes
to.
is available out of the box with
Yeah,
HTML.
auto detect
What I was
changes is
saying.
available. Yep.
Nice. It is easier than putting it in each place that you need it.
Yeah, if you wanted it to be on all the time, you can provide component fixture auto detect token, but this, like, it doesn't work all the time how you would want, because when you create a component, if you're using Zone.js, this will synchronously run change detection, so you don't have an opportunity to set the input beforehand. Component ref dot, set input. Like, if that was a required input, this is going to blow up because it runs change detection as soon as you do that. That doesn't happen with Zoneless, though, because change detection is always asynchronous. That's another weird thing about zones, is sometimes change detection will happen synchronously, and sometimes it will be asynchronous. And if you've ever had to debug sometimes sync, sometimes async stuff, it's also the worst.
Love it. Okay, so we don't want to deep dive too much into this because, again, we're civilians and we're still wrapping our heads around the whole zoneless thing. But it really sounds like it's just gotten so easy because, once again, you guys are doing our work for us. And like with Signals, like, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. We're going to do it all for you. I love it. Okay, so does anyone else have any more questions about zoneless? I see. I'm sitting here trying to get you to come and help me convince them all to use markForCheck, and they don't even have to. This is great. I love it. Okay, can we ask you a couple of questions? Everybody's good on Zoneless, right? Anybody have any more questions about change detection? We could talk for days about change detection, so I don't want to deep dive too much into that.
Just a quick question on change detection.
Go ahead.
Is there a way to make on push the default?
And what should
No.
the name of the default be?
Yeah, right. You can do it through the schematics where it will add it by default, but you can't change it with the compiler. This is something we're definitely going to be looking at in the future. The naming is terrible with on push and default, and we don't like the default being default anymore.
Love it. It's so cool for us to like know how you guys think about this stuff and like what you're working on even before it comes out, because when we're writing our code, this is what Edward and I were talking about the other day. I was following Angular version 2 when it was in beta, and I was using like 1.5 at work, but I knew that I needed to start going ahead and putting the components in. If you know standalone is coming out and you're starting to really, not lean so much on modules, or you're like really looking at the roadmap and keeping up with that, then it really allows us to just make our updates almost effortless, but really much easier. So love it. Okay, do you have time for just a few quick questions about the Angular language service for our friend Aristides Pampakos, who could not join us today? But he's actually he's one of the reasons I summoned you, because he asked for you specifically, and I was like, oh, Andrew Scott's already on the list. So we wanted to ask you about this. Okay. Hold on, let me move this up. What is the difference between the TypeScript language service and the Angular one, and how do they interact with each other, if they do?
Yeah, they're different.
And wait, even can I back up before you even answer that? Just for the civilians, because like I said, we have beginners, we have Angulars, architects. Can you tell us briefly the Angular language service? Like, this is what gives us like the cool autocomplete stuff and everything.
Yeah, the Angular language service and the TypeScript language service both provide language features like autocomplete, hover, tooltips, refactor renames, find references, those types of things. So
when you're working in VS Code and you've got all the cool stuff that's happening in VS Code that just comes automatically, the Angular team has to help them do that, basically, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. By default, like editors do not know anything about your code. So we have to implement the language service and create the extension for VS Code to help it know about these things. They're different. The TypeScript one and the Angular one. TypeScript provides TypeScript language features, and the Angular provides the analysis for Angular stuff. We use the TypeScript language service inside the Angular one to help us understand TypeScript stuff. So your templates are compiled to TypeScript code, and then we use the TypeScript language service to like find the references of those TypeScript code things, and then we map it back to the template stuff. This is kind of a dance, like us asking the TypeScript language service to tell us about all the TypeScript stuff, and then us converting that into an Angular thing, so that we don't have to re-implement find references. That would be not fun. Yeah, so the Angular language service provides Angular stuff, which for the most part is limited to template information. So that's either the external templates and HTML files, or it also works for inline templates and in TypeScript files.
Nice. And you guys actually, because the Angular team was kind of an early adopter of TypeScript from the very beginning. So do you guys collaborate with I mean, you guys kind of collaborate with everybody, which I love.
Yeah, the Google TSJS team has meetings with the TypeScript team all the time.
Nice. Speaking of collaborating, that was, you answered his second question already, but his third question was, how would somebody go about contributing to the Angular language service?
It's a little tough because the stuff is spread across the repos. It really depends what you're trying to do. So there are a lot of pieces and parts that go together to create the language service extension. There's the compiler stuff, which is on the Angular repo. That provides a lot of the backbone to the information that the language service uses. And then there's the language service protocol part, which is in the VS Code repo, that like calls to the compiler things and gets the information and converts that to like the standard language service protocol. So that's the Angular language server. And then there's the extension part, which interfaces with VS Code itself. And that also does adds like commands like go to component. It adds the syntax highlighting. Yeah, so there are a lot of different pieces. As with all the other Angular stuff, it's open source, so you can contribute by doing that. But it's a little bit hard when you're coming from the outside, contributing to framework code. It's not easy.
Yeah. Well, luckily, Aristides Pampakos, the guy asking all these questions, is an Angular GDE, and he has contributed a lot in the past to Angular and helping out with the translations and everything else. So I'm sure it's not too advanced for Aris, but for the rest of us, it might be a little bit challenging. Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to get started, but we always love community contributions. We actually have there's someone named Ivan who contributes a lot to the language service, and his stuff is really top notch.
Shout out to Ivan.
Yeah, he implemented the first quick fix stuff. So if you are like typing in a template and your variable isn't created yet, he implemented the thing that does like the command dot and then create that property or function in your component.
Nice. Thanks, Ivan. All right, we have gone past the top of the hour. I just want to check and see if anyone has any more questions. I know you also worked on the router, so you could talk about Zoneless, you could talk about the language service, the router. Any more questions? Going once? I'm going to turn off the recording and we'll stay and hang out. It's Friday. We'll stay and hang out for a little while. You guys know the drill. Anybody else have questions? No? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, but before I do, you guys know the drill. Please come off mute and help me thank Andrew for coming and teaching us cool stuff.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you so much.
It was great.
Thank you.